Operation Mincemeat was a really strange idea. It was also one of the best ideas the Allies had in World War II. It saved thousands of lives. It helped win the war in Europe. It was a deception on a grand scale. The whole thing sounds like something from a spy novel, but it was all true. The year was 1943. The Allies were planning a big invasion. They wanted to take Sicily. Sicily is an island just off the tip of Italy. It was a clear target. Everyone knew it. The Germans knew it. The Allies knew the Germans knew it. This was a problem, a big problem. If the Germans knew exactly where the Allies would land, they would be waiting. They would have their defenses ready, they would have troops there. That would mean a lot of Allied soldiers would die. The invasion would be much harder. It might even fail. So the Allies needed a plan. They needed a way to trick the Germans. They had to make the Germans believe the invasion would happen somewhere else, not Sicily. They needed a really good distraction, something big, something convincing. It had to be so good that Hitler himself would believe it. This is where a secret committee came in. It was called the 20 Committee, or the XX Committee. It was named that because XX is the Roman numeral for 20, and also because double cross sounds like XX. This group was in charge of using double agents to feed false information to the enemy. But for this plan, they needed something even more clever, something totally different. Two men were central to this new idea. One was Ewan Montagu. He was a British naval intelligence officer. The other was Charles Cholmondeley. He was an RAF flight lieutenant. They were both part of the 20 Committee. They often brainstormed crazy ideas. This time they really outdid themselves. The idea came from a memo written by a clever intelligence officer, John Godfrey. He was Ian Fleming's boss. Yes, the Ian Fleming who later wrote the James Bond books. Godfrey's memo talked about planting false documents. He suggested using a dead body. A body floating in the sea. This body would carry the fake papers. It was a wild idea. And Montagu and Cholmondeley thought it was exactly what they needed. They looked at the idea from all angles. It seemed impossible, but they also saw how it could work. A dead body found floating in the sea. It would look like a real accident. A plane crash, a ship sinking. The documents on the body would seem real. They would be found by chance, not planted on purpose. This would make them more believable. They started to work out the details. They called their plan Operation Mincemeat. It was a strange name. But then, it was a strange operation. They had to think about everything. Where would they get a body? How would they make it look like a real person? How would they get it into the sea? Where would they drop it? How would they make sure the Germans found it? And how would they make sure the Germans believed the fake papers? It was a huge undertaking. It was risky. If it failed, the Germans would know the Allies were trying to trick them. That would make future deceptions much harder. It could cost lives, but if it worked, it could save many more lives. It was a gamble they felt they had to take. The stakes were incredibly high. The future of the war in the Mediterranean depended on it. Montagu and Cholmondeley knew they had to get every single detail right. They started with the very first, most difficult problem, finding a body. The plan for Operation Mincemeat was incredibly detailed. Every part of it had to be just right. The first, and maybe the most difficult, step was finding the right body. They couldn't just use any body. It had to be one that looked like it had drowned recently. It also had to be a body that no one would miss. That sounds a bit cold, and it was, but war is cold. They found their man in London. His name was Glinder Michael. He was a homeless man. He had died in a London hospital from eating rat poison. It was a sad, lonely end, but for the purposes of the operation, his death was useful. The doctor said he had died from poisoning, but the poisoning had caused fluid to build up in his lungs. This meant his lungs looked like they had been filled with water. It would be hard to tell he hadn't drowned. This was crucial. They needed the Spanish doctors to believe he had drowned at sea. Once they had the body, they had to create a whole new identity for him. They named him Major William Martin. He was given a rank in the Royal Marines. They chose the Marines because it was a force that operated at sea. So it makes sense for him to be found floating in the water. He was given a backstory. A full, detailed, believable life. This was the genius of the plan. They didn't just give him a name. They gave him a personality. They wanted him to seem like a real person who had just had a run of bad luck. They created a whole persona for Major Martin. He was supposed to be a regular guy, not some super spy. He had a fiancée named Pam. They wrote love letters from Pam to Martin. They included a picture of her. It was actually a picture of one of the intelligence officers. The letters were a bit sappy. They talked about their upcoming wedding. They talked about the engagement ring Martin had bought for her. They gave him other personal touches. Theater ticket stubs from a show he supposedly saw just before his trip. At a receipt for the engagement ring. A letter from his bank showing he was overdrawn. This made him seem human. It made him seem like a man with everyday problems, someone you could believe in. They even gave him a set of keys and a wallet with a little bit of money in it. They included a St. Christopher medal, a common good luck charm. All these things built a picture of a normal life. The most important item was the briefcase. It was a sturdy leather briefcase. Martin was meant to be carrying important documents. So, the briefcase had to look like it contained military secrets. It was chained to his wrist. This was important. If it wasn't chained, the Germans might think it had just drifted there. If it was chained, it meant he was protecting its contents, but it also had to look like it had been forced open by the sea. They put a fake key in his pocket, a key that didn't fit the lock. This would make it seem like he tried to open it, or it was just a random key. The briefcase had to look damaged but not destroyed, like it had been through rough seas. Inside the briefcase were the fake documents. These were the heart of the deception. They couldn't just write, "We're invading Greece and Sardinia." That would be too obvious. They had to be subtle. They created 2 letters. One was from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nee, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, Commander of the Allied Forces in North Africa. The other was from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral of the Fleet Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander of the Naval Forces for the invasion. These letters were carefully worded. They talked about Operation Husky, which was the real code name for the Sicily invasion. But the letters implied that Husky was actually a feint, a trick. They hinted that the real targets were Greece and Sardinia. They made it sound like Sicily was just a diversion, a way to draw German attention away from the real landing sites. The letters even included a casual mention about the need to keep the feint on Sicily looking very convincing. This was the clever part. By saying Sicily was a feint, they were trying to convince the Germans it was the real target. But then they contradicted it by saying the real targets were elsewhere. It was a double bluff. Every detail mattered. The paper, the ink, the way the letters were folded, the typewriters used. Everything had to match official British documents. They even added a red herring. A letter from a fictional British intelligence officer to a Royal Navy officer in North Africa. This letter asked for sardines, a subtle nod to Sardinia, and also mentioned a cat that was being watched. The cat was a metaphor for a German spy. It was just another layer of deception. It was designed to make the Germans think they were uncovering a network of spies and hidden messages. They spent weeks, even months, putting all these pieces together. They wanted to create a person, Major Martin, who was so real that anyone who found him would believe his story. And through his story, they would believe the fake invasion plans he carried. They knew this was their one shot. They had to make it count. The lives of thousands depended on their meticulous work. With Major William Martin's identity complete and his briefcase full of fake secrets, it was time for the next risky step: getting the body into the sea, and making sure it was found in the right place by the right people. The British chose the coast of Huelva, Spain, for the drop. Spain was officially neutral during World War II. But it was also known to be full of German spies, especially in places like Huelva, which was a port city. There was a very active German intelligence network there. This was perfect. They wanted the Germans to find the body, but through the Spanish authorities. It had to look like a natural occurrence. On April 19, 1943, a British submarine, HMS Seraph, set sail from Scotland. On board, in a container packed with dry ice, was the body of Glinder Michael, now Major William Martin. The submarine traveled all the way down the coast of Portugal and Spain. It was a long journey. The crew on the submarine knew nothing about what was in the container. Only a few top officers knew the real purpose of the mission. In the early hours of April 30th, the HMS Seraph surfaced a few miles off the coast of Huelva. Montagu and Cholmondeley were not on board for this part of the operation. The submarine's captain oversaw the final preparations. The body, dressed in a Royal Marines uniform and a life jacket, was carefully brought out. The briefcase was chained to his wrist. Everything was checked one last time. Then, with a prayer, Major Martin was gently pushed into the cold Atlantic waters. The crew then set the currents and tried to drift the body towards the Spanish coast. They made sure the body would reach a place where a fisherman was likely to find it. The very next morning, a local Spanish fisherman found the body floating in the sea. Just as planned, he reported it to the local authorities. This was the start of the process. The Spanish officials pulled the body from the water. They saw the uniform, they saw the chained briefcase. It looked like a legitimate accident. A military officer lost at sea. The Spanish immediately notified the local British vice consul, Francis Hazelden. He was already aware of the operation. He had been given instructions on how to act. His job was to appear concerned and to ask for the return of the body and any personal effects. He was to act like a normal diplomat, dealing with a sad incident. He requested the return of Major Martin's body for burial and his briefcase for official purposes. The Spanish military and police began their investigation. An autopsy was performed. The Spanish doctor, Dr. Eduardo del Rio, examined the body. He concluded that Major Martin had died from drowning. He estimated the death had occurred recently, about 3 to 5 days before the body was found. This fit the British timeline perfectly. It meant the body had not been in the water for too long. His report was meticulous. It even mentioned the condition of the lungs, confirming the appearance of drowning. During the investigation, the Spanish authorities examined the briefcase. It was still chained to the body. They eventually managed to open it. Or at least they said they did. The British had hoped the Germans would convince the Spanish to let them copy the documents. Or, even better, that the Germans would simply steal them. And that is exactly what happened. The local German Abwehr intelligence service agent, a man named Adolf Kloss, was very active in Huelva. He quickly became aware of the discovery. He put pressure on the Spanish to let him see the documents. The Spanish, who often collaborated with the Germans despite their neutrality, eventually allowed the Germans access. Some accounts say they simply gave the Germans the documents to photograph. Other accounts suggest the Germans secretly exchanged the real documents for fakes, photographed them, and then returned the originals. Either way, the Germans got what they wanted. The British, back in London, were watching. They had planted a special piece of paper in Major Martin's wallet. It was a fake identity card, but it was printed on special paper that would only react to certain chemicals. If the Germans removed it and exposed it to those chemicals, it would change. This was their way of knowing if the Germans had actually handled the documents. When they got the wallet back, they tested the paper. It had changed. This was the first solid sign. The Germans had taken the bait. They had seen the documents. Now came the agonizing wait. The documents had reached German hands. But would they believe them? Would Hitler himself be convinced? The entire success of Operation Mincemeat depended on the Germans accepting the story of Major Martin and the fake invasion plans. The lives of thousands hung in the balance. The British intelligence officers could only hope that every painstaking detail they had woven into Major Martin's fake life would convince the enemy. The fake documents from Major Martin's briefcase were now in German hands. This was a critical moment. The British had done their part. They had created the perfect illusion. Now it was up to the Germans to either fall for it or see through the deception. The German Abwehr agents in Spain quickly sent the photographs of the documents to Berlin. These were not just any documents. They appeared to be high-level communications between senior Allied commanders. This instantly made them seem very important. The Germans began to analyze them. They had their own intelligence experts, their own code breakers, and their own analysts. They would scrutinize every word. There were debates within the German high command. Some were skeptical. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, was a shrewd operator. He was known for being cynical. He initially expressed doubts about the authenticity of the documents. He thought it might be a trick. He pointed out small inconsistencies, but other German officers were less suspicious. They saw the letters as a genuine intelligence coup. It seemed too good to be true, but also too detailed to be fake. The key to the deception's success, however, lay not with Canaris, but with Adolf Hitler himself. Hitler had a tendency to believe what he wanted to believe. He was already suspicious of an invasion in the Mediterranean. When he saw the documents from Major Martin, he was immediately convinced. The letters specifically mentioned Greece and Sardinia as the real targets, with Sicily merely a feint. This fit with Hitler's own intuition and his existing concerns about the Eastern Mediterranean. Hitler became personally convinced that the Sicily invasion was a smokescreen. He issued direct orders based on this belief. He commanded his generals to move troops. German divisions, including Panzer tank divisions, were redeployed. Crucially, a panzer division was moved from France to Greece. Other forces were shifted to Sardinia and Corsica, islands near Italy that the fake documents had highlighted as targets. The reinforcements that might have gone to Sicily were instead held back, or sent to these new threatened areas. This was exactly what the Allies wanted. Back in London, the British intelligence officers were waiting with bated breath. How would they know if the Germans had truly swallowed the bait? This is where Ultra Intercepts came in. Ultra was the top-secret British program that was decrypting German Enigma machine communications. If the Germans were talking about Major Martin's documents, or about moving troops based on them, Ultra would pick it up. For days, there was nothing definitive, just the agonizing wait. Then, the messages started to come in. The Ultra Intercepts began to show the word mincemeat, or mincemeat operations appearing in German communications. This was the code word the British had assigned to the operation. The Germans had used it. This confirmed they were discussing the intelligence. Then came the real confirmation. Ultra revealed that Hitler himself was ordering the redeployment of forces to Greece and Sardinia. It was explicit. He was telling his generals that the Sicily invasion was a diversion. He was pulling troops away from Sicily to protect these other islands. This was the ultimate proof. Operation Mincemeat had worked. The deception was a complete success. The Germans had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. The relief in the 20 Committee was immense. They had gambled on a wild, audacious plan, and it had paid off. The meticulous planning, the creation of Major Martin's fake life, the carefully crafted letters, every detail had combined to create an irresistible lure for the German High Command. The stage was now set for Operation Husky, the real invasion of Sicily, and thanks to Major Martin, the Allied troops would face significantly less resistance when they landed. Thousands of lives had likely been saved before the first shot was even fired. This was the true measure of Operation Mincemeat's success. It wasn't about winning a battle, but about avoiding one, at least in the expected brutal way. With the Germans fully convinced that Sicily was a feint, the stage was clear for the real invasion. On July 10, 1943, Operation Husky began. Allied forces landed on the beaches of Sicily. General Dwight D. Eisenhower led the overall operation. British, American, and Canadian troops stormed the island. The landings were met with much lighter resistance than expected. The Germans had indeed moved many of their forces away from Sicily. They had redeployed them to Greece, Sardinia, and Corsica, just as Hitler had ordered based on the Mincemeat documents. Instead of facing prepared defenses and reinforced divisions, the Allied troops found the German and Italian forces stretched thin and largely unprepared for an invasion of this scale. The element of surprise was almost complete. This reduced resistance was critical. It meant fewer casualties for the Allies. Estimating exactly how many lives were saved is difficult, but historians generally agree it was in the thousands. An invasion that could have been incredibly costly in terms of human life was made much easier. The rapid advance of Allied forces through Sicily was a direct result of the confusion and misdirection caused by Operation Mincemeat. The success of the Sicilian campaign opened the door for the Allied invasion of mainland Italy later that year. It was a major turning point in the war in Europe. The deception had played a vital role in accelerating the Allied advance and putting pressure on the Axis powers. For years after the war, Operation Mincemeat remained a closely guarded secret. It was one of those highly sensitive intelligence operations that couldn't be talked about. But eventually, the story began to emerge. Ewan Montagu, one of the masterminds behind the plan, wrote a book about it in 1953 called The Man Who Never Was. The book became a bestseller. It was later made into a very successful film in 1956, also called The Man Who Never Was. This brought the incredible story to a wider audience. As the story became public, people started to wonder about the real identity of Major William Martin. Who was he? For a long time, he remained officially anonymous. It wasn't until the 1990s that his true identity was fully revealed. Glyndwr Michael, the homeless man from Wales, was finally named. He was given a proper grave in Huelva, Spain, marked with his real name, and the epitaph, Glyndwr Michael, served as Major William Martin, MRV. It was a small act of recognition for a man whose sad death had helped save so many. The ethics of using a dead body for such a purpose have been debated. Was it right to use a person's remains, even a homeless man whose family couldn't be traced, without consent? In the context of total war, with hundreds of thousands dying, the decision was made. The military justification was that the saving of so many lives outweighed the ethical considerations. Today, it remains a stark reminder of the desperate measures taken during wartime. The brilliance of Operation Mincemeat lies in its attention to detail and its deep understanding of human psychology. It wasn't just about planting fake documents, it was about creating a compelling story, a believable character, and presenting the information in a way that made the enemy want to believe it. The little touches, the theater tickets, the love letters, the overdrawn bank account made Major Martin real. The subtle wording of the fake letters made the deception seem almost accidental, a true intelligence find. Operation Mincemeat stands as a masterpiece of deception in military history. It showed that sometimes the simplest, wildest ideas can be the most effective. It wasn't about brute force or technological superiority, it was about cleverness, imagination, and a willingness to take huge risks. Its lasting impact is significant. It changed how intelligence operations were viewed. It proved the power of strategic deception. It inspired future generations of intelligence officers to think outside the box. It reminded everyone that war isn't just fought with guns and tanks, but also with wits and cunning. It's a story that still captures the imagination, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of those who fought in the shadows, helping to turn the tide of one of the darkest conflicts in human history.